Donald Trump and the Republicans are waging war on democracy. Elie Mystals is here to discuss. Welcome back to Defending Democracy. I'm Mark Elias. Let's get started. Elie Mystals, welcome to Defending Democracy.
Mark, the man with the plan. How are you doing?
Good. I got to tell you, this episode is like the right-wing vote suppressor's nightmare. I mean, they're going to look at the title, and they're going to look at the thumbnails, and they're going to be like, "Oh my God, we need to investigate."
Because we can see what they're doing, right? Like the one of the things that people don't understand is that the right wing thrives on public apathy, right? They thrive on public ignorance. And once you tell the people just what they're doing and why, what I find is that most people are as outraged about it as we are, right? Most people dislike the voter suppression techniques of the Republican Party just as much as we do once they understand how they're doing it.
Right. And so I want to start with one of the ways they do it that you outline in your recent book, which is a great book called Bad Law. And I am so happy that you actually highlight this particular law, and that you actually, in talking about the book as a whole, I've noticed in other interviews, you use it as sort of a jumping off point. And I love that too. So voter registration laws. Let's talk about why it is in the United States, even though the state knows where you live, the state knows that you're over 18, right? The state knows whether you're an eligible voter. You still have to go through another step to register to vote.
Right. It's a way that every state uses to add an additional hurdle to prevent people from voting. What people need to understand is that voter registration is not there to protect our elections, and it's not there to make sure eligible voters can vote. It's there to make sure that eligible voters can't vote, right? Because once you establish eligibility, and we can talk or argue or theorize about what voter eligibility requirements there should be, but Mark, you and I are going to agree that there should be some should be some voter eligibility requirements, right? But once you can establish that you're eligible, why do you have to go through the second hoop? Why do you have to jump over the second hurdle of pre-registering to vote? So as I explained in the book, voter registration laws are not endemic to the country or the Constitution. They're not required by the Constitution. They weren't in use at the founding of the country. The first one kind of came up in Massachusetts in the 1800s, and it didn't catch on. It was like, we don't actually need that. Voter registration laws did not take off in this country until after the Civil War and after really the Great Migration of newly freed Blacks migrating north to the cities, and of course the immigrant influx of people from Europe, especially Southern Europe, immigrating to the large northern cities. And so what a lot of people don't know is that the first and most awful voter registration laws happened in the North. They happened in the North, and they happened in the North specifically to prevent the Irish, the Italians, the Blacks from voting in big cities. The first voter registration law in New York, and this shocks people when I tell them that, the first voter registration law in New York State only applied to New York City. Only applied to New York City, right? So anywhere else, you're living in Rochester, you're living in Westchester like I do, you live in Albany, you don't have to pre-register to vote. But if you live in the Black, immigrant, Latino city, guess what? All of a sudden, you have to register to vote after you can establish that you're eligible. Again, it's a second hoop thrown into the system that prevents that's meant to add friction to the voting process.
Right. And I think you outline kind of two ways that states can abolish this, or at the federal level, it could be abolished for federal elections at least. Congress has that authority at a minimum. One is automatic voter registration. The other is same-day voter registration, which is really just another way of saying when you show up at the polls to vote, you give them the information to make sure that they know that you're registered. Going back more than a decade, I've been advocating for automatic voter registration, which is just a way of saying that the states know who you are, they know where you live, And if we had automatic voter registration with today's technology, it would actually save states money. And my pitch to Republicans, you have a different pitch to Republicans, which I want to ask you about voter ID. My pitch to Republicans is you want clean voter rolls. You want no fraud. There is no better way to have clean voter rolls than to do away with voter registration and just have automatic registration. Because then if you move from Westchester to Oneonta, the state of New York knows you've moved, and they remove you from one and they remove you the other. You do away with all of this paper filings. You do all away with all of this burdensome clerical work that counties have to do. You actually wind up with a much more secure, a much easier election to administer, and you reduce any risk of double registration.
You're 100% right. And it also just kind of conceptually, it shifts the onus on to the states to maintain the voter rolls as opposed to onto the citizens. And if you are a Republican who is allegedly concerned about voter fraud and voter shenanigans, which you and I know to not be a real thing, but if you want to pretend that you're concerned about that, well, then why aren't you in favor of shifting the onus to the state as opposed to the citizens to maintain the voter rolls? As you say, Mark, it not only makes it easier for everybody to vote, it makes it easier for the states to maintain clean registration, right? You mentioned something that's also endemic to the idea of getting rid of voter registration laws or doing automatic registration, voter registration portability, right? This is the thing that we do that is different from every other advanced democracy and really every other democracy on this planet. The idea that once you are registered, if you move even a couple of blocks, you have to re-register. Again, the onus is back on you to re-register and reprove your eligibility to the state, when it's far easier for the state to track you as you go and just re-register you or re-counter you wherever you happen to move, right? So voter portability, both, I mean, I would argue for national voter portability, but at least between the states, at least within the blue states. I mean, let's not forget, Mark, that some of the most ridiculous voter registration laws we have come, again, just like in the beginning, come from the north, come from the blue states. It's New York, it's Pennsylvania, which with Byzantium voter registration rules, there's no reason that a state like New York doesn't have voter portability, especially when you think of New York particularly as a renter's state, right? As a place where people are generally not putting down roots for 20, 30, 40 years, where you are, I do the example in the book. When I moved, when the ground unit in my apartment building opened up, which I was waiting for, right? I moved from, apartment 3B to apartment 1A, and technically I had to re-register.
That's right.
What is that? Like,
yeah, no, and I've been in litigation where Republicans have tried to disenfranchise voters over exactly that. I mean, this is what he's saying, everyone, is not a hypothetical. I mean, this comes up. This comes up with people moving apartments within the same building. It comes up with students moving on the same college campus dorm rooms. And all of these are just traps. These voter registration provisions are just traps. We saw last year the state of Montana try to pass a law to say it's a crime if you register in Montana and you have not unregistered in the other place, right? Because then they say you're double registered. Like this whole thing is a trap. And there are two things I think you and I agree 100% on, and that is rare for me to find anyone who agrees as strongly as I do on these things. And so I want to lay them out and then get your reactions. The first is that we lack, and I say this by we, I mean that on the left as well as on the center and on the right, we lack a commitment to pro-voter jurisprudence. We lack a commitment to the idea that the purpose of election systems are to serve voters. And so I sometimes get myself crosswise with people on the left because they view the election officials as the heroes of the story. And to me, the voters are the heroes of the story. Like, it is not like I'm not here to make the job of election officials easier. I mean, I love election officials to do a good job. I like the fact that people volunteer, but like, ultimately, we're not doing this for them. We're doing this for the voters. And if there is a system, if there is something in the system that is not serving voters, we ought to do away with that. I proposed a piece of legislation, which of course I don't get to pass laws, but I proposed that what we ought to do is say that there is a national right to not wait more than 30 minutes in line to vote. And if you do, the state has to pay you. They have to pay you for your time. Because here's the thing. The only people who wait in line in this country routinely are either young people or black people. Yep. Go look at any picture of people waiting in line. There are no middle-aged white people waiting in line. There are only young people or black people. And the young people are almost always on college campus. So it's really black people waiting in line. And I don't understand why they should bear the economic loss of having to wait in line. Why don't we shift that to the people, to the states? And then the second thing, and then I'm going to shut up and let you answer all of this, is that we need to be as aggressive about this in blue states as in red states. That there are no free passes. And so when I sued New York for banning food and water waiting in line, a lot of people were like, why are you suing New York? I'm like, because they're banning food and water for people waiting in line. They're like, yeah, but you're suing New York. I'm like, we threw a fit, correctly so, when Georgia passed this law, and I sued Georgia. But why is the New York legislature not repealing the law? Like, you know, they can just repeal this law. Why do I have to sue them? Anyway, so those are my two bugaboos that I want to get your reaction to.
100% agree on both points. For the first point, let me just do another anecdote. To my town, I live in Mount Vernon, and my town is historically redlined, right? So there's a fountain in the middle, and generally, black people were allowed to live in the south, and white people were allowed to live in the north. That's changed somewhat over the years. I happen to live on the north side of town, so in the primaries, I live in my voting booth. My polling station is in the north side of town, in the white side of town. I've never had to wait more than 5 minutes in a primary, right? In the general, it's for the whole town, so it's on the south side of town, and I am in line for hours with other black folks in my town trying to get to vote in the general election. And I'm, you would say, oh, well, primaries are less, populated than general elections. In a presidential primary, no line in the white part of town. In a general election for county prosecutor, right? In an off-year general election for county prosecutor, hour-long line in Mount Vernon, once you include all the black people. This is not an accident. This is not a coincidence. This is by design of our voter system. So I 100% agree. The idea that people should have to wait more than 30 minutes, people need to understand voting is supposed to be easy and frictionless for the citizens and expensive and difficult for the government. That's actually the point of a democracy. Like, that's actually how it should work. It should be, the onus should be on the government. It should be hard. It should be expensive. It should be time consuming. You're electing the representatives of the county and the state and the nation, right? But for the citizens who are busy, who have other things to do, we should be making it as easy as possible for people to exercise their franchise and then go back to whatever, to watching the game, to hanging out with their kids, to doing whatever it is they do. It should be a frictionless process, right? On the second point, I noticed the lawsuit against New York. I loved it. We have to start with blue states. Mm-hmm. We're not going to get ahead in this fight if all we're doing is yelling at Arkansas, is yelling at, like, obviously, like, that's an uphill battle. If we can't get New York, Pennsylvania, California, Illinois to do the right thing, we can't even model the right behavior for the red states. It's literally the equivalent of telling your kids, do what I say, not what I do. No. They pay attention to what you do. If New York and California had model voter access laws, model laws that we could then port, that we can then just copy and paste. Look at how good it's working in New York. Why can't it work that way in Florida, right? Look at how good it's looking in Pennsylvania. Why can't it work that way in Ohio? Like, that's actually the argument that we need. We need to be able to show that, like, when you open up voter access, when you decrease the barriers to entry to voting, guess what? Fraud doesn't happen. I mean, we already know that, but let's show the example, right? Fraud doesn't happen. Voter participation goes up. Like, all of these things. And then I think especially for people on the hard left, on the far left, where I generally live, right? That's those are generally my people. You also need to see what happens in elections when you open the aperture and when you make it a lot easier for people to vote, right? I think New York's the city's experimentation with ranked choice voting, which I'm a fan of, is really starting to show people the different kind of possibilities that happen when you open the aperture to voting laws, right? Progressives need to see that and have these examples in these blue states of it working. So then when we go try to fight Arkansas, when we then go try to fight Texas, we have model examples of how things could be and how those red state legislatures are not allowing them to be.
Yeah, I mean, what you say is so important because as a lawyer who litigates cases like this, the number of times I have wound up in a courtroom in which a red state, AG, and even the nonpartisan lawyers for the state, they're like, why the hell is he like? He's complaining. Mark Elias is complaining about the fact that we have X numbers of days of early vote. These blue states don't have any early vote. He's complaining about our voter registration. Look at New York's voter registration. Why is he attacking our ban on food and water in line? Look at what New York like. And so you're right. Like there is a comparator that takes place when you litigate these cases, and it really sucks, to use a good legal term, when the blue states are not doing their job. I have a question to you about sort of motive and culture, because one of the things I have complained about is that on the right, they don't let a legislative session go by without making it harder to vote. Like if you're, if you're like they prioritize they prioritize voter suppression, and yet we don't, in the states where we control power, we don't prioritize expanding access. And I'm just curious, because you're not just a brilliant legal mind, you're a brilliant political mind. Why is that? Like, why isn't that a priority of Democratic controlled legislatures?
There's a simple reason. It's a terrible reason, but it's simple, right? When you increase voter access, you threaten the powerful. You threaten the powerful in the Republican Party, but you also threaten the powerful in the Democratic Party. One of the reasons why New York has some of the worst voter registration laws is because the Democrats who are in control of New York don't want to get got, don't want to have their power threatened by a more expansive, by having to campaign in front of a more expansive version of New York State and especially New York City. It's I like to say it's the AOC problem, right? Because when everybody votes, more people like AOC win. And if you remember, AOC took out a leadership
Joe
Democrat,
Crowell, leader, member,
in the primary, and that's because a lot of people showed up and voted for her, right? If you make it easier for people to vote, you make it easier for people like AOC to take out establishment Democrats, and that is what Democrats are afraid of more than. And what pisses me off is that they're afraid of that more than they're afraid of Republicans. They're afraid of losing primaries that are well populated, that with high turnout primaries. They're more afraid of that than they are losing general elections to Republicans. And so they make the voting laws in such a way as to protect their own power, so they don't get clipped in a primary. And it's obvious that they do that. I when Biden came into office, I was like, he's got two jobs. One, jail Trump. Two, right? Just make sure that he can't run for president again, fail. And two, restore the voting rights and the voter access that the Supreme Court and the Republicans under Trump and under Bush took away. Neither President Obama nor President Biden restored voting access. They stopped the slide into full voter suppression. They didn't make it worse, but they didn't bring back what we've lost. As you know, it all goes back to Shelby County, right? Like the John Roberts decision in Shelby County v. Holder, where John Roberts essentially declared slavery, racism over in the South, according to John, and eviscerated Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. that is a blow to this democracy from which this country has yet to recover. I will believe to my grave that Trump never wins in 2016 if Shelby County doesn't happen. I will take that belief to my death. And there was an attempt in the Biden administration when he had control of both houses of Congress to restore Section 5. Manchin and Sinema weren't on board. We didn't want to break the filibuster, and so that's the reason, I guess, why the most key voter protection law ever, and I have often said, Mark, that the 1965 Voting Rights Act is the single most important piece of legislation ever passed in America. It is the first piece of legislation ever passed in America to make the 15th Amendment mean something. And thereby, it is the first piece of legislation in America to make us a fully functional democratic republic. We were not a functional democratic republic before the Voting Rights Act.
Right. So this is a question I've got to ask you from your book. So you suggest that perhaps laws passed before 1965 are of dubious. I don't know if you'd say constitutionality. I'll let you explain.
Unconstitutional. Well, as you know, Mark, like the presumptive is doing a lot of legal work in that sentence, right? I'm not saying that we should actually repeal every single law before 1965.
So, like the antitrust laws, you would not repeal.
Right? Like Sherman Antitrust Act, brilliant law. Let's keep that one, right? I'm not saying that we should repeal every single one. What I am saying is that in terms of judicial precedential value, we shouldn't consider these laws at the same level as everything passed after 1965, right? So if your argument, and lawyers know this, but your listeners might not, the courts allegedly, supposedly, are supposed to pay a lot of attention to precedent. And you know, I'm not saying that the current court does, but I'm saying that's what courts say they're doing and are supposed to be doing, right? And how you value those precedents is supposed to have a huge impact on how you rule on future cases, right? So if we did it one way in 1830 and we did it the same way in 1920, then when it comes back up in 2020, we're supposed to kind of do the same thing unless circumstances have radically changed, right? What I'm saying is that the radical change to circumstances was 1965. That is the most radical change to this country's circumstances. So if you are coming to me with an argument that only has value in the pre-1965 precedential universe, right? If your only argument for why this law should still be here or why this rule should still be here happened before everybody was allowed to vote, then guess what? I don't care. That's a crappy argument. That's an argument that should not hold a lot of judicial weight. Is the point of my contention. And so, yeah, if there's a law that was passed before 1965 that we still like, we can re-support it. We can pass it again, this time with everybody. I think we could pass the Sherman Antitrust Act again. I mean, Elon Musk probably wouldn't like us to, but I think we could probably pass that again. But some of these other laws we probably couldn't pass again, and maybe we shouldn't. Maybe everybody should get a say here. And whether or not this thing, you know, from the slaughterhouse cases, you know, whether or not we still think that's good law.
I'll be right back with more of my conversation with Elie Mystals in a moment. But, you know, there's no doubt about it that Donald Trump and his administration is threatening political opponents. Free and fair elections are under attack. And there's just a lot of uncertainty and unanswered questions going on out there. So, look, if you're looking for answers, this Tuesday, June 24th at 7 p.m. East Coast time, I will be on a live virtual event answering your questions. So be part of a community of thousands of like-minded individuals committed to protecting democracy. Sign up at the link above or in the description below. All right. The other thing I got to ask you about is you've offered Republicans a deal. I'm not sure how I feel about your deal, by the way. I want to probe this deal. But go ahead and explain what the deal is and why you've offered it.
Yeah, so look, I do not like voter ID laws. I do not think they are necessary. I do not think they are good. I think they are another form of voter suppression. But Republicans allegedly love them. Republicans say that they're necessary. Republicans say that they're necessary to secure elections. And some Democrats, looking at the general popularity of voter ID laws, also seem kind of voter ID law curious, right? As usual, Democrats don't want to stick their foot in the ground and fight. They're trying to find ways to compromise and have comedy to the Republicans, and so they're voter ID law curious. And so I say, fine, let's make a deal. You get your voter ID laws, I get automatic and portable registration nationally, and let's see what happens, right? Because in my world, the idea that voter ID laws are necessary is ridiculous. But what I want, what I think is so much more important is automatic registration, that I'm willing to give them the baby. I'm willing to give them the bottle, right? While that deal would hurt people who are, and you know, just to be clear, in my version of the deal, whatever ID is required has to be a free one, has to be one that you don't have to pay for, because if you have to pay for it, that's an unconstitutional poll tax in my estimation, right? Even if it seems like a little bit of money to you, it probably isn't a little bit of money to the person who hasn't paid the money to get the ID, right? There's a reason for that, right? So if you give me a free national ID that's easy for everybody to get and makes you feel like your elections are secured, but with that ID, you are now automatically registered, and that registration is portable, not just within your state, but within the entire nation, I make that deal and see what happens.
Okay, so you think the Republicans don't take the deal?
Yeah. Republicans are the ones that don't take it, because the Republicans understand that that deal increases voter access. And what the Republicans are in for is not to secure elections, it's to suppress voter access. And that deal increases voter access while giving them their bottle on this election fraud thing, which they know they're lying about. They know it's not a real thing. So they're not going to make a deal that increases voter access and solves a problem they know they made up. That's why Republicans won't take the deal. Democrats won't take the deal because they're politically, they engage in political malpractice. They would rather just give them voter ID for nothing. Oh, no. If you're going to be a Democrat and you're going to say like voter ID is okay, which you shouldn't be, but if you're going to be, get something for your capitulation, get something for bending the knee, get automatic registration in exchange for bending the knee on voter ID. That's my argument to the Democrats. Republicans would never take that deal.
The conversation I sometimes have, sometimes with Democrats in good faith, sometimes with Republicans in, you know,
questionable
faith. Yeah. Is what are you trying to do with this ID? Like, what are you trying to prove? Because if all you're trying to prove is that I am the person I say I am, then there are lots of ways to do that. I mean, like, if all you're trying to say is like, you know, you're trying to prove I am Mark Elias, then first of all, the number of IDs that could prove that I am Mark Elias is dramatically larger. Like, it has never been clear to me why, for example, Republicans will say, well, you need a valid in-state driver's license. I mean, is the out-of-state driver's license like somehow not going to prove who they are? You know, like, is a student ID not going to prove that they are? Is someone their neighbor saying, I know this person, and I will swear on an affidavit that this person is who they say they are, like a witness, right, can prove who someone is. The poll worker knowing them could prove who they are. Them having a bill or, you know, some type of access to, you know, a lease or something, like a corporate ID, a letter from their university or their employer could prove who they are who they say they are. And so quickly this ID thing starts to head down a road of where they want to prove address, they want to prove this, they want to prove that. And I'm like, but why is that? What work is that doing in a regime of voting where really you're claiming you just want to make sure there's no fraud, which is that the person presenting themselves is who they say they are? I mean, how about you just take their picture and have them swear an affidavit at the polling location? And then if there's an allegation of fraud later, you could like either prove that's the person or not. But I'm just curious, what do you think Republicans... What do you think in your deal Republicans would insist on? Because I don't think they would take just to prove the person is who they say they are.
in this day and age, you could also just like Google me, right? Like just right, like it's literally not hard. That's a really good question. What are Republicans trying to prove? Aside from that you're white, what are they trying to prove? And the real answer is nothing. They're not actually, they're not actually worried about voter fraud. They know they're lying about it. They know it doesn't exist. They're just trying to add a hurdle. They're just trying to add another step to prevent people from voting because they know. And it's the thing where it suppresses their own votes too, but they don't care because they know that it will suppress more Democratic votes than Republican votes. It's a zero-sum game for them, right? And if, in the same way that a rising tide lifts all votes, if they can lower the tide, they will win at the margins with low turnout elections. Republicans love low turnout elections right now, because right now that benefits them. You can imagine just a couple of ticks on the political wheel in the future, it'll flip again, and low turnout elections will favor the Democrats, just like low turnout elections favor Democrats in Democratic primaries, and then the Democrats suddenly become the ones who favor low turnout elections, and thus all of the voter ID restrictions towards that. But there's one other thing, and you're absolutely right in your arguments to Republicans about how many different ways there are to prove who you are. As a lawyer, those are the arguments you have to make in court. I like to also, without the burden of ever
you're
having
a lawyer.
To show
You're a lawyer, but where you
it's been a long time since I practiced. So without the burden of ever having to show up in the courtroom, I always like to point out one other thing. If you show up to an election to vote as somebody who you are not, who cares? Who cares? Like the idea that there is going, not only that there fraud exists, but there is going to be fraud in such numbers at such ways that are going to change the results of an election are thoughts for people who have not paid attention to how elections work in this country. Like, it's just not something that's going to happen. Do you know, Mark, how many fake IDs I had to buy beer between the ages of 18 and 21? I had a lot. I was Elie Mystals in a couple that was just happened to be 30. I was Stephen Hunter because a black guy named Stephen Hunter dropped his ID in a store, and I just picked it up, and he looked close enough to me, and so I just used his, like, the ways that any college student can get a fake ID to buy beer is exactly the same way that any American can get a fake ID to vote, if that's what we're really concerned about. And the reality is that even if people do that, it would not matter. It would not change the results of any kind of election, especially a national one, especially like a congressional election or a statewide election, or like the numbers just aren't there. So
Right.
while
And
I totally agree with you legally that, like, the idea that only a valid driver's license is the only way to ensure that you are who you say you are, and that's bunk. But the other just reality that we don't talk about enough is that not only does fraud not exist, but even if it did, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah,
it just wouldn't matter.
Look, you're making a point that I have emphasized over and over again, that the right to vote is really the only right that we have in the Constitution that is not subject to strict scrutiny. Like, we don't require states to have a really good reason to restrict the right to vote. We kind of allow imagined reasons for it. And that's just not what we would accept from any other right. And
this is what Professor Rick Hansen wrote about in his book, A Real Right to Vote. There is no constitutional amendment securing the right to vote.
One of the consequences of that, though, is what you're talking about, which is that what other right would we allow impinged because there is any abuse of the right? Any. Like essentially, we allow some number of guilty people to go free because we have certain rights. We allow certain number of innocent people to be convicted because we have a judicial system that has rights. But but you're right. In the area of voter fraud, the standard to which the system seems to be held is that there can never be a single instance. So you never have the, like, so, okay, so one person used the fake ID and voted. Like that's not enough. How many people are you willing to disenfranchise to keep that one person? Are you willing to disenfranchise 10? 1,000, 100,000, a million, right? Like, what's the and we as a country, we don't engage that discussion that it's okay if there's going to be some bad actors, if what it means in result is that more good people are going to be able, more legal people lawfully are going to be able to vote.
Can you imagine if we did this with guns? Right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Anytime somebody uses a gun illegally is a reason to take away the rights of legal gun owners. Imagine if that's how it worked, right? Now, every time somebody uses an unregistered gun, we just randomly take away the registrations of 10 registered gun owners just to make sure, people wouldn't stand for it. Liberals wouldn't stand for it. Anti-gun liberals would not stand for it. If that's how we treated the Second Amendment, right?
All right.
But again, as Professor Hansen says, we don't have an amendment. We have there are 4 amendments in the Constitution that try to open the aperture to voting. Right? There's the 15th, there's the 19th, there's the 24th, the poll tax amendment, and there's the 26th, the lowering the voting age to 18. These are all the way that they're worded, and it's a technical legal nerd thing, but I think non-legal nerds need to understand it. They're all worded as prohibitions, right? You cannot restrict the right to vote based on race. You cannot restrict the right to vote based on gender, right? They're not positive grants, right? There's nothing in the Constitution that says you have a right to vote as long as. You have a right to vote for. You have a right to vote doesn't actually appear in our founding document. And it's one of the fundamental flaws of that document. As you know, Mark, the reason why it's not in the Constitution is because the people who wrote the Constitution didn't think that was a federal issue. They just it's a miss. It was a mistake, but they didn't think it was a federal issue. They thought it was for the states to decide who was eligible, who should be registered, who should be allowed to vote. And the federal government was just the collection of all those individual state rights. And that makes sense when half of your states are slave states, right? That makes sense when in half of your states, 3/5 of the people don't get to be counted as people or whatever. But in the modern world, in the current times, it is a simple, stupid mistake that we should correct. I always say that, like, you can give me all your arguments for what the 28th Amendment should be, or you can give me all your arguments for that the 28th Amendment already exists and it's the Equal Rights Amendment. The 28th Amendment needs to be, you have a right to vote, period, right. End of story. Like that, you have a national right to vote.
Right. And it needs to not be balanced against other things any more than we balance other rights. And so I agree with you. Before I let you go, I have to take advantage of having you here because you are not only an accomplished best-selling author. This is now your second book that is a bestseller. You're not only an award-winning writer at The Nation. You're also someone who left law, worked for a relatively small at the time. Now above the law is kind of an institution, at least among the legal community. And we are in a moment in which the legacy media is, struggling, and we are seeing the rise of lots of alternative media sources and independent journalists and people who are willing to challenge some of the conventional wisdom and orthodoxy. And I'm just curious because you've kind of lived this journey, frankly, longer than probably. I mean, you're a young person, but you've probably lived it as longer as anyone, right? So, like, what do you make of where the media is, where the public is vis-a-vis the media? The concerns that you hear on the left about the right-wing media ecosystem, like how do you sort all that out in your head?
Well, it's a really good question, and nobody's asked me that before. So thank you for it. when I started Above the Law, it was 2008. It was right after it was during the financial crisis, the Great Recession, if you were. And even back then, I was taken by how outflanked the left was by the right in these spaces, in the online spaces, in the blogs, and the message boards, and the Tumblrs at that time, and the and Facebooks of that time, even before Twitter and TikTok and Twitch. That gap where we were losing in 2008 has only continued to expand over my career and over the past 20 years or so. I was fortunate, and people are surprised when I say this, but I was fortunate that the bar that I went to after work when I was at ATL was also the bar that Andrew Breitbart, like actual Andrew Breitbart, went to.
Of Breitbart News.
Of Breitbart News, right?
Yeah, so those of you who don't know, there actually was a guy named Breitbart.
Right? And we would talk all the time. We would talk all the time about new media, about what new media was doing right, about what old media was getting wrong, and how the right was winning the argument. And it all came down to something that I've taken from him and I've tried to apply in my career. You got to meet the people where they are. And the right wing is just better at meeting people where they actually are than the left. And there are lots of kind of historic reasons for that. There are lots of political reasons for that. There's lots of elitist reasons for that. A left likes to sound smart and likes to be smart and likes to be thought of as smart. I always like to bring up, John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana. John Kennedy is an Oxford educated man. He is one of the most kind of credentialed senators in the Senate. But when he talked like he just got out of the swamp. He talked like, oh, what's going on with all this gay people? Like, he talks like that because he's meeting his voters where they are. He doesn't think like that. I've seen the man's curriculum vitae, which he knows what that is, but he would never say it, right? He would never say that he has a curriculum vitae, right? He knows where his people are. The left doesn't. The left doesn't want to go and talk to their people where they are. And it's how we've gotten beaten in the new media space. The old media, the legacy media, their capitulation to Trump, I'm not surprised by it, really. It's access journalism is always going to be like that. Access journalism requires access, and they're going to say and do the kinds of things they need to do to get access. My criticism at this point with legacy media isn't even really about legacy media. It's about how the Democrats never punish legacy media when they have the opportunity, right? Some of these things if I was Hakeem Jeffries right now, I would be telling, places like the Washington Post, especially after their unendorsement or non-endorsement or whatever, guess what? You don't get a single one of my members. You don't get a single one of my members for any news article, for any story. We're not talking to you. Go run, CBS. You want to give Trump, $20 million. You're not going to get a single Democratic congressman on any of your programs. Stick that in your hat, right? Democrats never punish legacy media for its biased coverage for Republicans. Republicans punish legacy media all the time for its coverage of Republicans. And so it's no surprise that legacy media now favors Republicans, now covers Republicans in the way that Republicans would more like to be covered, because they'll get hit if they don't. They got no problems. They don't get hit at all if they don't cover Democrats fairly. So that's the legacy media issue. On the social media, on the ground, in the trenches, man, I'm a gamer, Mark. I watch a lot of YouTube streams about video games. My kids watch a lot. We're nowhere. Our people are nowhere. It is all right-wing male, whether it's overt or subliminal. It's in their face all the time. We've got to start playing where our voters are.
All right, last question. People come up to you on the street. You're recognizable, and they are worried. They're concerned. They are concerned about their economic situation. They're concerned about the tariffs, but they're also concerned about democracy. They're concerned about the ICE raids. They're also concerned about what Donald Trump is doing to education. Like, they're just concerned every which way. And so when they come up to you and they say, what should they do? Like they feel powerless by this all. What do you tell them?
Well, first of all, that feeling of powerlessness is by design. right? Like one of the things you can do is just not feel that way, because that is literally what he's trying to make you feel. He's trying to make you feel powerless. He's trying to make you feel exhausted. He's trying to make you feel like it's all too much and you can't get a handle on it. And just fighting through that feeling is at this point part of the resistance, right? It's part of fighting back, is to not feel like you can't fight at all. The other weekend with the No Kings rally, like that was a great indication that people still have power and people still have the motivation and the ability to go out and take to the streets and stand up for what they believe in. In terms of what we can do, we just need more of that. We need fascists always overplay their hands. They always overplay their hands. We are in a stage right now where Trump is overplaying his hands, and we just need that kind of sustained. So like the protests are great. It's got to keep going, right? We have to have the sustained effort, this is the stamina basically to outlast him. And that is the challenge right now. I don't know if we'll have a free and fair election in 2028. I don't even know if we'll have a free and fair election in 2026. But I do know that if we all accept the unfree, unfair election coming for us, that's when it's over, right? It's when we start to accept the unacceptable that things become truly dire. So yeah, when people come up to me, and as you know, Mark, that they do it all the time, it's keep your face in the fight, keep your energy up, keep paying attention. Because you do need the stamina to outlast this man.
Well, Elie Mystals, you have the stamina and you have the attitude and the fight, and that's what we need. And that is why I'm a huge admirer of you. It's also why I want to make sure everyone buys your book. And so we're going to put a link to that in the description below. But please, it's a great book. The part on voting is only one part. The voter registration is actually only one part of the book. There are 9 other recommendations or laws that need to go. And so I recommend you buy it and read the entire thing. And thank you for everything you do every single day fighting for democracy. I cannot tell
Mark,
you how much I admire you. And when you're on TV, I cheer. And when you write, I read. So thank you.
Mark, right back at you. When I got the invites for this podcast, I saw the date. I knew it was right after Juneteenth, and I was like, doesn't matter. I don't need a long weekend. It's a thrill to be able to talk to you. Literally, my mother. I'll just leave you with this, because my mother lives with me, and so she was like, "What are you doing today?" I was like, "I'm on with Mark Elias." She was like, "Really? How did you swing that? That's big." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, Mom. I know." So my mother, everybody in my house, including my mother, are huge fans.
Well, you're always welcome back, and I look forward to having you on again.
Thanks, brother.
Bye. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Defending Democracy. Please make sure you're subscribed to this YouTube channel, and also make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's newsletters to stay informed on the latest voting rights and democracy news.